that film Titanic, you know.
Yeah.
But no, it's lovely to be here, and I look forward to playing some music for you later on. It's a little unusual, really, for me to be, talking without having the music around me, because in the show that you'll come and see later, I hope, you'll see that we mix the music up really together with a lot of stories. And I'm a child. You all look too young to me, but I'm a child who was born in the age of shared music. And what I mean by shared music is that when I was young, we would buy an album. Of course, then they were vinyl, and they were big, and they had artwork. There you go. How nice of you. And we'd sit round together and we'd listen to the music, and in some way, we would be bonded together by it. It was our expression. We understood what the music meant. In some ways, we almost lived through the music. I think some of those very big festivals like Woodstock, the Isle of Wight, California Jam, a number of them I played on. And I think it wasn't just that the fans were coming along to see a particular band. It was this sense of gathering, of belonging, of being bonded together by the music. That was the incredible feeling of the time, and it now fascinates me. When I do this show, Songs of a Lifetime, it fascinates me because, in a way, I suppose, music is a sort of tapestry that we all live our lives against. I mean, not only the music of Emerson, Lake and Palmer and King Crimson, but of course of all those great bands from that era. And we all have a kind of, thank you, and we all have a sort of a feeling through the music, and it reflects things in our lives, some of them very tragic, some of them very happy. I often get people who come up to me and say, Greg, that brain salad surgery got me through university, stuff like that, And nowadays it gives me really a great sense of satisfaction to feel that in some way the music that I created has played some part in people's lives. It's more important to me really than the success or the money or the fame. It is the fact that music passes from soul to soul. You can't touch it, you can't see it, but you can feel it. And that has always been something very magical for me, is that, I could write something or have a feeling for a song, and that could be transmitted through time and through space into someone else's soul. I will never ever get over the magic of how that works. And to me, when I write a song, it belongs to me, But as soon as I put it on a record and people buy it, the song belongs to them, because that's their interpretation of what it means, I think sometimes lyrics mean different things to different people. And I really mostly don't like to answer questions about lyrics, because it depends on how you feel about them, what they mean to you. It's not really up to me to say, well, this song means this or this song means that. It really depends what it means to you. But having said that, if there's anybody who would like to ask some questions, indeed about anything you like, there are three gentlemen down here on the floor with microphones, and they're like the Bee Gees, really. And if you put your hands up, if you'd like to ask a question, they'll come along with a microphone, and you can fire away. You can ask anything you want, within reason. Please go ahead.
I would like to know the most difficult song to perform that you were successfully able to perform happily for your enjoyment.
The most difficult song? Well, I suppose, it's a strange thing about music, because even things that look very, very complicated, when you divide them up into little segments, they're just a succession of little segments. When you hear it all together, of course, it sounds very complicated and difficult. It's actually a wonderful lesson in life, that when you have something very complicated to do, or a challenge in front of you, if you look at it in its entirety, it's formidable. It's depressing almost. But when you start to break it down piece by piece by piece, and you accomplish each piece in succession, then all of a sudden it becomes very, very easy. And I think it's the same with any sort of, any accomplishment. It's like a magic trick. As soon as you know how to do it, it's simple. Until you know how to do it, it's impossible. And so, having said that, you know, I suppose the most difficult thing to perform was Pictures at an Exhibition, which is a classical piece by Mussorgsky. Thank you very much. You know, in ELP we began to play it, believe it or not, as it was just as a sort of hobby, really. But when we got to rehearsals, Keith Emerson used to have the piano transcription, and he would just play it for practice. And after he used to do it every time we started to rehearse. So after a while, I used to play along with him. So now you had the bass and the piano playing Pictures and Exhibition. And after a while, Carl Palmer would join in. So now you had all three of us playing this classical music. And as each day passed, so we would learn more and more of it. And one day I remember being on stage, it was in the north of England, and we were playing the concert, and in those days we didn't have a sort of formal set list. You know, there was no list of songs. We would just call out the next song, you know, because we didn't have that many. So it would just be call out the next tune, and we'd play it. And one day, Keith looked over at me and he said, "Pictures at an Exhibition." And I said, "What?" He said, "Pete, let's play Pictures." I said, "We can't play Pictures, you know." I said, "Come on, just do it." And we just did it. And the audience just went wild, you know. And what we discovered was that up until that time, classical music had really been reserved for them what knows, you know. It was considered an elitist thing. Yeah. It was for the well-educated, you know, your people who were well-educated or wealthy, or, you know. When we played it, of course, it became accessible for everyone, for all the, you know, the kids who had turned up at the concert. Whatever their educational status or their cultural status, they could understand and enjoy, essentially, classical music. And incredible as well was that the orchestral versions started to sell in quantity as well. So what it told us was, not only did it introduce people to classical music played by a rock band, but once they liked it, they actually went out and bought the you know, original version. I suppose it's something I'm quite proud of. I mean, we weren't the only people to use classical influences. Interestingly enough, the great Moody Blues were another band who brought classical influence into their music. You know, something that's interesting is that most rock music is based upon American music. That is to say, blues, gospel, soul music, country and western music. Most rock and roll music draws its inspiration from those basic forms of music. But in, you know, around 1968, 69, you know, in those days, certainly in England, it was becoming important to be original. All of the bands at that time had their own identity. I mean, you could play a record by Jimi Hendrix or The Who or the Moody Blues, and you would know within 3 seconds who you were listening to.
Yes.
Nowadays, I can listen to the end of a record, I still don't know. You know, because music records became products. Then they were works of art. Then
Amen.
You needed. Then you needed to be original. And of course, in all of these bands, there were these characters. Every band had its characters. Keith Moon, you know, as I said, Jimi Hendrix, people like this. They were effervescent. characters, luminous. And, you know, so in those days, you know, it was important to be original. And one of the things was that when the first band that I had success with was King Crimson. And
Yeah.
thank you very much. And in order to be original, we sat and we thought about it. And we thought, you know, maybe what we should do is try and draw influence from European rather than American music. Not that I mean, I love American music and I grew up playing it. I mean, I'm actually quite good at soul music, funnily enough, you know. You'd never know that, would you? But I am. It's because I played music from the charts when I was a kid. At one point in my youth, my repertoire consisted of 200 songs. I used to actually, when I played at my family's parties, I used to challenge them, you know, that if they could name a song that I couldn't play, I would give them, you know, 25 cents or whatever it was. But if I could play it, they would have to give me the same. I got rich. And, you know, until they, you know, they realized after a while. But, you know, so, I really was in touch with soul music and I love it. But my entire career has kind of shut me away from that because it's all been based on European heritage. And I'm often asked if I have regrets. You know, people say, Greg, have you got any regrets in your career? Well, I mean, I can't really have regret. How could I possibly have a regret? You know, I was born, you know, a poor kid in an asbestos prefab, and I've had an incredible life. So I really and truly, I've got no regrets. I mean, other than the small regrets that everyone has in life. It's full of ups and downs, but generally no regrets. The one big regret I've got is being cut off in a way from soul music, you know, and it's something now that I'm not focused so much on being in a band that I'd actually like to do more of, and that's find my way back into that music because it's tremendous. And so that was it. But so really, there is this term that you will have all heard, which is progressive music. I don't like the term personally. It sounds pseudo-intellectual, you know, progressive music. But really all it means is music that has a European rather than American influence. So I'm sorry if that was a long-winded answer to your question. That was it. Pictures at an exhibition was the most difficult part. Next question then, let's find somebody. There we are.
First of all, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
And personally, I always considered you to have the greatest voice in all of rock music.
Thank you very much.
Tell me about Lucky Man. Is there a story that goes with it?
Well, there is. But now you've just taken away one of my stories from my show. But I will tell it to you because it's a funny story, really. I wrote the song Lucky Man when I was 12 years old, and my mum bought me a guitar. I wanted a guitar for Christmas, and so I said to my mum, is there any chance I could have a guitar, you know? And she said no. And I said we were poor, so I didn't expect it. But when Christmas came, there was the guitar. Of course, I was thrilled, and I started to try and work out the chords. You know, I learned these few chords, and with the few chords, I created this little song. It was like a medieval fantasy, a kid's fantasy story, really, about a medieval knight, I suppose he would have been. He had everything, you know, he had everything. And but in the end, he was killed, and so it was all for nothing, you know. It was a kind of Greek tragedy, come medieval fantasy. And anyway, I never wrote the song down. I mean, I just played it for my own amusement. And it wasn't until many years later, during the making of the first ELP album, when we got to the end of the recording sessions and we were one track short, and nobody had any idea no new ideas for another song. So I said, well, look, I've got this folk song that I wrote when I was a kid, and I played it, and no one liked it. And so Keith Emerson said, well, why don't you just record it on your own, and I'll go down the pub. And he went off down to the pub for a drink, and I sat and recorded it, and actually did it with Carl Palmer. And the first thing we did was we recorded the acoustic guitar and the drums. And to be honest, it sounded pretty dreadful, you know. But then I put the bass on it, and I put some more guitars. I did all the block harmonies, like the Beach Boy harmonies, and I played electric guitar on it. And by the time I'd finished, it sounded pretty, you know, it sounded like a record. And Keith came back and he was really shocked. You know, what had sounded like this flimsy little plaintive song had developed into quite a substantial sort of rock song. And he said, oh, perhaps I ought to play on that, you know. He's a bright boy. And so I said, yeah, no, by all means. I said, but the thing is, I've already put the electric guitar solo on it. He said, okay. He said, I could put something on the end as it fades out. So he said, do you know what? I've just had this instrument delivered in the studio yesterday. It's called a Moog synthesizer. He said, I've never actually tried it, but maybe there's a sound on there that we could use, you know? So I said, fair enough. And he went out into the room, into the studio, and he started to experiment. And there's this effect, it's called portamento. And what that is when you play a low note, and then you play a high note, one swoops up to the other. Boom, you know, it's a sweeping sound. And I said to him, you know, that's an interesting sound, that is. And so we said, okay, let's experiment. Run the track and I'll experiment with this sweeping sound. And whenever I record anybody really doing a solo or experiment, I always put the track in record, because you never know what accidents may happen just that once. And if you're not in record, of course, it's no good going back and saying, make that same accident happen again, because invariably it will not, you know. Anyway, we recorded this experiment, and to be honest, as it was going on, we put the speakers onto dim, and the engineer and I started chatting over it whilst he was experimenting. And when we got to the end of the song, I said to Eddie, the engineer, I said, was that me, or did that sound good? And Eddie said, do you know, I think it did. Let's play it back. We spun back and we played it. That is the Moog solo that is now on the end of Lucky Man. And I said to Keith, you've got to come in and listen to this. It's extraordinary. And he said, no, I was only messing around. I could do a real one now. And it took me 3 or 4, I had to actually go out in the studio and force him to come and listen to it. And of course, when he sat in the studio and heard it back, it was clear, everyone could see it was a really great piece of work. And of course, it went on to be a definitive solo. It was the original electronic solo, really. And so the song had, thank you, and you know, credit to Keith as well. The song really had a lot of properties. It was simple, and it was innovative in a sense, you know. And I think simplicity is often the most sophisticated form of originality, you know. It reminds me of a funny story, actually. I'll tell it to you. It's a kind of joke, but it's a funny story. There's a drummer in England, and his name was Phil Seaman. He was a great drummer, session drummer, really. And he would be hired for all the music gigs, you know. If it was a big band show or, you know, a musical, Phil Seaman would be the drummer. He was a jazz type drummer, and technically extraordinary. And so there's this story. One day he was in the studio with a big band, like with trumpets and trombones and everything. And they were recording this piece of music, and they would go along, you know, and then it would stop and there'd be a drum break. and Phil would come back in again, you know. Marvelous drum fill. And the producer stopped the track. And he said, Phil, you know, when we get to this drum fill, he said, I'm really looking for something special. So Phil looked at him, you know, because he'd just blown his brains, you know. And he thought, well, okay, I'll try another one, you know. So they start the track off again, you know. Came to the drum fill. Phil was explosive. All the players just looked in amazement, you know, he was so great. The band came back in, it was phenomenal, you know. Producer stops the track again. The band looked, what, why? Why did he stop? Producer said to Phil, Phil, look. He said, I don't quite know how to say this. He said, when you get to this drum fill, I'm looking for some real magic. So Phil, you know, because he'd given, by now he'd done you know, he didn't know that. So anyway, he says, okay. They start the track off again. Comes to the drum fill. Phil puts down his sticks. He stands up and he says, fucking abracadabra. The great Phil Seaman. Next question, please. Where are we then?
Yes, Mr. Lake, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak to you.
Yes.
I have one just simple question. Do you still stay in contact with your partners?
Yes. Yeah, we do. I mean, we don't spend a lot of time together, but we, you know, we still run all of our own records and copyright and all of that. We did play together a couple of years ago in London, which was a very nostalgic show. Very strange experience, actually, because, of course, the music we made as ELP was, I don't know, 40 years ago or 35 years ago, whatever it was. And of course, the expectation that people have when they come along and see you again as a band is they want to see you as they remember you then. And so you have to, in a way, live up, or at least as close as you can, to that expectation. And that isn't so easy, of course, when you're older, and it just hurts more. But we worked very hard, and you know, we did come as close as I would ever have imagined we could to the original performances, and it was quite eerie to stand there all that time, having had all that time elapse, and feel exactly the same feelings and music and everything, the sense of timing that was an exact replica of what we'd done before. It was very nostalgic, and there were, of course, people backstage were crying, and they were, because people had grown up with this music, and they, you know, and I find now when I do my show, Songs of a Lifetime, that, you know, it does give people a perspective, because this music, of course, has happened all throughout their lives and throughout my life. We've shared this journey together, and that to me is a wonderful thing. I think that the word sharing, thank you. Sharing is such an important thing. I've discovered that, you know, my mother always used to say to me, you know, Greg, a trouble shared is a trouble halved, and a pleasure shared is a pleasure doubled. And it truly is, and I've learned the value of sharing, not only on a personal level, but also with all my friends, all my fans, all of you, all of the people who've lived those many years together with me through this music. So thank you very, very much. Is there any other questions before I turn into a pumpkin? Yeah.
It's a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
The pleasure is more than doubled here. I have loved all of the music you've done with your groups as well as your solo work. Is one of them your favorite?
I suppose, you know, the truthful answer to that question is the ones that are most successful are the ones that you tend to like the most. But in truth, you know, I try and put 110% into every recording. I've always been like that. I look upon a record not as a finished article. I look upon it in some way like a check that you make out and pay at the bank. You know, a record is only a record. Really, when someone's good enough to buy your record, I think there's an implicit understanding that you should come and perform for them. Could we take this voices out of my monitor, please? I'm hearing the other microphones. Thank you. Sorry. So to me, a record is only a record. It's the implicit understanding is that when you buy that record, and I think this goes for any artist, that really you owe that person a live performance. So, you know, in a way, music isn't about favorites or not, really. It's like a group, it's like having children, really. You don't prefer one child to another, but you go on this journey with these children, with these songs, with this music, and you share them. And so, to me, that is really what it's about. I don't, you know, I like it if you like it, to be honest. That's what gives me the pleasure. If I play a song and I see that it touches you or reaches you in some way, that's what I like about it. Then for that moment, that's my favorite song, you know. I really don't have sort of one. Funny enough, a few years back I did a tour with Ringo, and he said to me one night, he said, you know, Greg, people always ask me what my favorite Beatles song is. And he said, I always tell them it's Rain. I mean, it's not